What up, ball knowers? My name's Darian, and welcome back to my second long-form YouTube video, today being the biggest Broncos training camp storylines. Let's hop right into it. Starting us off, let's go to the secondary position battles. First, with the safety 3 through 5 battles between Devin Key, J.L. Skinner, Miles Scott, and Tyson Anderson. Now, I've mentioned these guys before on my TikTok, but for YouTube, I think we have 4 guys competing for likely 3 spots for the safety 3, 4, and 5 roles. I think to start off with, I got Devin Key taking that safety 3 spot. He is the most experienced playing. Obviously, wasn't the best when he was out there for games like Baltimore and Cleveland. He struggled a little bit, but coming off an all-pro special teams year, I think Devin Key is poised to step into that safety 3 spot and replace PJ Locke. Now, I have my biases. I'm still a kind of a fan of J.L. Skinner. I'm a sucker for the big safeties, and I think he could play a small role on this team. But if not, he is a very good special teamer, and he is my personal safety 4 in this room. Also, knowing Vance Joseph defense the most, I think he's got the most experience, the most trust, and I think J.L. Skinner will have that safety 4 role to start, obviously being paired alongside Devin Key in training camp in the preseason. It's just if he plays well enough to hold on to that, and if he's a useful enough special teamer to cut one of the guys like Miles Scott or Tyson Anderson. Now, next up, I think taking that last spot will be Miles Scott. The Broncos obviously decided to use a draft pick on him. He's going to have 4 years of control. So I do think he ends up taking that spot as long as he plays well enough. Tyson Anderson, I think a guy that Robert Livingston brought in as he was the former Cincinnati secondary coach before he left for CU, but now back in the NFL with the Broncos as the secondary coach. But I do think while Tyson Anderson is a really good gunner, he hasn't really found his way onto the field for the Cincinnati Bengals, and we all know that secondary has kind of been bad since the departure of Livingston. So I do think Miles Scott, being a guy the Broncos scouted and ended up taking, is going to be the guy taking that last spot, and Tyson Anderson will be a guy cut, maybe coming back on the practice squad as a vet player. Miles Scott is a decently sized safety, a captain at Illinois, a good tackler. It's just up to his athletic upside and how much he can bring there and how much he can get trust in the special teams game with Darren Rizzi. I do think that'll be an important part of this. Obviously, you need guys who are going to be on special teams, be a core 4 special teamer for you, and I think Key and Skinner have that step up on those guys, so we'll see how Miles Scott and Tyson Anderson fare there, as well as playing the actual safety position. Next up, along the lines of secondary battles, will Jahdae Barron and Riley Moss actually have a camp battle? We've heard a little bit from Sean Payton that Jahdae Barron will play some outside corner during camp and the preseason. Just how much will he play? What is his role supposed to be for this Denver Broncos defense? And will he actually get a chance to beat out Riley Moss, or will Riley Moss have that starting position going into the year? I was a high on Jahdae Barron coming out of the draft, but that was more as a nickel player, or if a team wanted to play him off ball as an outside off-man zone type corner. But the Broncos decided to take him at 20 as more of a press man type team. And while I still think he can be a high-end nickel corner, the Broncos do have Jaquan McMillan, who is a potential extension eligible player entering his final year of his deal. So Jahdae Barron will be hard-pressed to find time in that nickel spot, moving him more to an outside role. And while he's a good athlete, he does have shorter arms and he's not the tallest player, so he could struggle there a little bit. But I do think he's athletic enough to hang if the Broncos wanted to put him outside, and they can get creative with him and the usage of their secondary more. Riley Moss is coming off of an up-and-down season. He had his good moments, but he really lacks ball production. Only 1 interception for all the targets that he has, and he had a lot of penalties last year, so I'm interested to see how he will potentially bounce back for this Broncos secondary. Like I said, will we actually get a chance for Jahdae Barron to compete with him and potentially beat out Riley Moss? I think Pat Surtain will be on a limited snap count, especially during the preseason, so I'd like to see Riley and Jahdae competing with each other on the outside during those games. I've mentioned before in the past, I'm not big on paying Riley Moss. I think no matter what type of season he has, as long as it's not getting benched for a guy like Jahdae Barron, he will be sought after decently well in the free agency market, looking at $15+ million as a good CB2 option and strong outside corner. And I don't think the Broncos should pay that to them. I think Jaquan McMillan should be a priority. I think a guy like Brian Jones should be a priority over Riley Moss if they want to bring back 2 of those guys. And I think if Riley Moss played well, he could get close to $20 million, and I just don't think the Broncos can afford to do that. And everyone's looking for corners. So I don't think the Broncos should pay Riley Moss, and I think Jahdae Barron should find his way onto the field if he plays good enough on the outside. Next up, we got the interior defensive line. Now, Sean Payton's initial press conference yesterday came out to where he said that there will potentially be 3 guys in the mix to replace that JFM position. Now, a guy you don't see on here is Ioma Wazarike. Now, from what I've heard, Ioma Wazarike is kind of switching in and out with DJ Jones more as that nose tackle. So I think the 3 guys that are going to be in the role to replace JFM will be Malcolm Roach, Savion Jones, and Tyler Onyedem. Now, we also heard today in the Talanoa Hufanga press conference that replacing JFM, he did bring up Big O, which is Tyler Onyedem, to potentially replace that role. So I think the Broncos are probably looking for the highest ceiling of these guys being Tyler Onyedem to get some snaps. But obviously, I think Malcolm Roach will be the day one starter in the position of JFM. And I think Tyler Onyedem probably could leapfrog Savion Jones for snaps and play more of a key impact role than he will, being a more true interior defensive lineman coming out of Texas A&M. Now, that doesn't mean I'm giving up on Savion Jones. He's a sick athlete, but moving into the interior after playing edgier college career is definitely a transition. So I think he still might have some growing pains there, but if he looks good through camp and preseason, I definitely still see him having a role in this D-line rotation. Now, Sean did say that obviously it's tough to evaluate these guys right now, no pads, so we'll have to see the pads go on to see these guys really compete with each other and see who stands out. Moving on to our third camp question, who will emerge as the wide receiver 3? Now, what we heard from day one is that Pat Bryant had a big day, snagging 3 TDs in the 7-on-7 periods, 1 from Bo Nix and 2 from Sam Ehlinger, and I think he's the best fit for that big slot role that the Broncos could run with guys like Pat Bryant, Evan Ingram, Justin Jolie, and etc. But I do think people are sleeping on Troy Franklin. He took a big jump last year from his rookie season, obviously still dealing with some of those drops, but I still think his speed and his nuance and his route running can still be a big factor for the Denver Broncos wide receiver core. And obviously you still have a Marvin Mims right there coming into his contract year. Going back to Pat Bryant, obviously we all loved what we saw from him last year, but he's not the best athlete, and he did deal with a couple concussions, so I don't think the Broncos will be pressed to play him in a ton of snaps, especially over guys like Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims. I think it'll be a healthy rotation, but I do see Pat Bryant potentially being the Broncos wide receiver 3 in pencil starting out the preseason and potentially in week 1 against Kansas City Chiefs. But like I said, don't sleep on a guy like Troy Franklin. I still like his skill set a lot. I still like what he brings to the Denver Broncos. Good over-the-middle threat, good outside threat, can play all 3 wide receiver positions, and just be a good Swiss Army knife in terms of that. And he's still just a sick athlete, man. Troy Franklin, an underrated athlete. I think people forget how athletic he actually is, and that's why he took a leap for the Denver Broncos last year, running a lot of the route tree and getting open a lot for Bo Nix. Obviously, those drops need to come down, and if he can be more efficient, maybe the numbers won't jump or be as good as they were last year, but he can still put up a decent number of touchdowns in the red zone, as he's probably one of the Broncos' better red zone targets as a receiver, and still be a capable wide receiver 3-4 for the Denver Broncos, having 2 years left on his deal. Now, I still need to give some love to Marvin Mims. He's still such a dynamic receiver and a very clutch receiver for the Denver Broncos. His hands coming up clutch in the playoffs, especially against the Buffalo Bills, and that big touchdown, or big play, I should say, against the New England Patriots. The thing is, Marvin Mims is such a useful asset in the return game, and the Broncos have struggled to find a secondary returner. They have brought in guys like Cam Ross, Colby Cassis, and Sean Fresh, but how much those guys will have a chance to actually make this roster is unknown. The Broncos likely have their 5 receivers and their 5 corners. So those guys will likely be delegated to the practice squad at most. So we'll probably see a lot of Marvin Mims in the return game, hopefully taking home another All-Pro nod in the punt return. So I find it hard-pressed for Marvin Mims to find his way higher than maybe 4th or 5th in snap count-wise for the wide receiver position for the Denver Broncos. I still think he can be a useful gadget piece. The Broncos just don't use him in a lot of routes other than deep routes and potential screens. So we'll see if that potentially changes with Davis Webb, but as of now, I still have him as slotted as my wide receiver 5, and I don't know if the Broncos will be looking to bring Marvin Mims back past this season. Last but certainly not least is an interesting position battle to look at, and that is the tight end position. The Broncos currently have 7 guys that they're going to have to get playing time through this offseason. One of them, unfortunately, already being hurt, and Caleb Lohner has not participated in the first 2 days of camp. And I'm really interested to see his future on this team because the Broncos did take 2 guys in this recent draft, and Caleb Lohner was such a raw draft prospect that I don't know how far away he actually is. He still could be a year plus more away from actually being playable on an NFL field. So we really need to see him get healthy and get back out there to see where he's actually at. But the other 6 guys include guys that they have played a decent amount during their regular season and their 2 draft picks, Justin Joly and Dallin Bentley. Now, at the top, you have Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, as from what we've heard, especially today, has been good in the red zone for the Denver Broncos and been getting decent usage under Davis Webb's play calling so far this offseason. And unless the Broncos end up having a shock trade or cut, I do think Evan Ingram will be on this team and potentially have a better role than he did last year. Now, we obviously need to see the hands improve and see him be more efficient, especially with his connection with Bo Nix. But I do think Evan Ingram still has a decent bit left in the tank, and if he can at least give us efficient football, then I still think he can be a good weapon for this offense. Next will be Adam Troutman. Obviously, the Broncos more slated blocking tight end. I put that in air quotes because Adam Troutman definitely regressed blocking wise last year. The screen game really took a hit, and his inline blocking had left a lot to be desired. But the Broncos didn't end up bringing him back on a 3-year deal. Questionable in my opinion, but he's here to stay and will be the Broncos' likely tight end 2 and lead run blocking tight end. Now, that likely leaves 2 spots for 4 guys. Now, I think Justin Joly's also a lock. The Broncos ended up trading up for him, and I think his athletic upside is something that the Broncos want, especially going with a more pass-heavy, wide look than some of the other NFL teams are looking for and more 13 personnel. Now, Justin Joly might not find his way on the field as much early with a guy like Evan Ingram, but I still think he can make an impact, especially in the red zone. Big body, strong hands. He can get open. He can be a mismatch for tight ends and safeties alike. Now, I said there was only 2 spots, but I do think Nate Adkins finds his way on this team, but I'd like him to be more of a fullback, H-back hybrid, being more taking over that Adam Prentice role, as I do think the Broncos still value Nate Adkins. His EPA per play on the field was higher than it was when the Broncos had him off the field, so I do think he can still be valuable to this team. We seem him to stay healthy and be more consistent. Had a decent amount of drops on low targets, so we need him to catch the easy ones and hopefully return to that more 2024 form when he was the Broncos' most reliable blocking and receiving tight end. So I think that final spot at the pure tight end position should go to Dallin Bentley. I think he's a strong blocker already, and I think he has a little bit of upside in the pass game. I know the Broncos took him late in the draft, but I do think they like him a lot. And I think he's just a prototypical tight end that you want potentially to replace Adam Troutman in the future. I think the Broncos lined it up where you have guys like Joly and Bentley replacing Ingram and Troutman in the future. And then you got a guy like Nate Adkins who can be a Swiss Army knife in that tight end room. Now that will wrap up today's video. Let me know if there's any other camp questions you have in the comments. I'll be sure to talk about them here soon. Camp is fully underway. I will be attending one day, so shout out Kodiak. I'm going to be attending it with him. Follow all my friends. I've mentioned them before. I'll put some of them in the description, and take it easy.